This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. Okay, so I got a question from Kent asking if I'd talk around some kind of metronome ideas regarding legato, and I thought, well, that might actually make a decent part of a video. And the video in general is going to be around habits that you could try to break for better legato. The tab for this and backing track will go up on my Patreon, which hopefully represents fairly decent value. I put up basically any backing track that is requested up there and all of the tabs for the lessons. So that's what, 4-5 lessons a month of their kind of Monday lessony stuff, and occasionally there's jazz chord melodies that go up. I need to put up Pure Imagination, by the way. But anyway, so first of all, basics around sort of thumb positioning. You're going to struggle with legato if you're going to play with your thumb over. So you more or less want to be aiming for kind of a relaxed hand position, something like that maybe, and with your thumb somewhere around the middle of the neck. That's kind of some kind of basic guideline. This might be difficult, this might be difficult, this is fairly neutral, right? Okay, right, so first of all, what is legato? The idea is that we pick and then either hammer on or pull off, right? The bit that I used to struggle with, that I've got more comfortable over time, to be honest, most people find the hammering on part not too bad. The pulling off, people, and myself included, find a bit more difficult. The thing that I've found that makes that a bit easier is, instead of thinking about pulling off with energy going this way away from the fretboard, think about it going this way from the fretboard. Okay, right. But that might be a habit to break, is instead of thinking about pulling off and pulling away, think about pulling slightly down. And in that way, I feel like you have a bit more of a relaxed hand. For me, I was oftentimes having to think quite hard about this kind of approach, whereas the sideways kind of makes it a bit easier. Now, the next thing is to start to think about this right hand. So you want to stop picking hard with the right hand, because the idea with the legato thing, if it's going to sound smooth, is that our picked notes are going to sound roughly similar in terms of velocity, in terms of articulation, in terms of attack as our hammered notes. And what that really means is that if we pick too hard, we start to break up the legato thing. Right? So if we pick softer, you kind of think of it as like brushing. The lighter the better, really. And we want to kind of think less about this being like a rough approach, but like a soft attack. And just sort of lightly brushing the strings. Maybe think about angling your pick a little bit as well instead of a straightforward. A lighter attack on the pick. Now, another thing, so this is specifically what Kent was asking about, was how do we get away from this kind of triplet feel? Because we generally, when we're playing legato, I've done another video on this, really, we are going to want to be playing 3 notes per string. So 3 note per string, major scale might be the sort of thing that you might Google to check that out if you haven't seen that already. But typically what we might do when we first get introduced to these things is try these triplet things. Right? Now the problem with that is, well, it's not necessarily a problem, but what I'd encourage you to do instead is, because those, you get this kind of that kind of thing where your picking can become a little bit, you don't have to worry about being as soft. What I'd encourage instead is something a little bit slower maybe, but 2, 3, 4, instead of 6 notes per beat or 3, aiming to start off with 4 or 16th notes or 8th notes, 2, 3, 4. And what you're going to notice is that this picking hand here isn't always hitting on the beat 4. And what I like to think about this as is kind of decoupling the right hand from always playing on the beat, right? Three, 4. Just keep things simple like that. I've not warmed up today, so sorry about this. But anyway, that's decoupling it from the beat. Now, one way to really get into this, I think I saw this from Tom Quayle once in like a jazz context, is instead of picking the first note, so we're now no longer even thinking about the first note as being dictated by a right hand, we're going to pick off the beat. So like every other note, 2. That's really tricky. 4. See, I'm hearing there that I'm not hammering that. So that's not quite working, right? So the idea is like that sort of little exercise for is really gonna start to make us think super hard about being more left-hand led and less right-hand led, and not having to necessarily, if we're not wanting to or not needing to, rely on the right hand to start every phrase. It's not necessarily something that I ever used in real life, but in terms of practice, it's really good for a couple of things, because not only is it decoupling this right hand from the first beat, it's also going to really show off where you've got a louder pick strike than your legato strike, and also make sure that this finger here and this finger here are actually attacking rather than being relying on your right hand. Now, one last thing that I would encourage you, because this is something that I got wrong, is to not rely too heavily on the metronome. And what I mean by that is, you know, some people you might hear doing this sort of thing. Now the problem with that is that you're no longer reliant on the actual time. So I think don't be too reliant on a click, and when you're using a click, I'd encourage you to even have things. So say this is at 85 BPM, I'm using Soundbrenner, I've clicked out some of the beats so that I've only got half as many beats, so the metronome is doing half the work. 2, 3, 4. So that whatever you're working on, you're actually building up your inner kind of metronome rather than leaning too heavily on the metronome. And when I used to lean heavily on the metronome would break. No, what I found is that I was likely to rush and that stuff, whereas with a half or quarter speed metronome, even though you're playing you take away those middle beats, I'm finding that way more difficult to lock in with, and way more difficult, although at the same time it's more clear to me when I'm not in time with it, if that makes sense. So the slower metronome is much more exposing. 1, 2, so this is 3, 4. When I'm feeling myself there floating out of time with the metronome, it's more noticeable. because the occasional time when it comes along, I can really hear, oh, that didn't happen on the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and then another thing to try doing, if you're struggling with this subdivision stuff to start off with, a thing to aim for is a lick that switches 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and you could try switching between quavers and semi-quavers. Like that, or you could try quavers and quaver triplets. That's a really, really handy exercise for, you know, that pick is going to be doing all kinds of crazy things there. You could try that in 16th and sextuplets. And by keeping it in that same position, you're starting to then have the kind of all sorts of chaos happening, because it's kind of a regular pattern happening in the same position. So your right hand is going to be doing very different things. Your left hand, sometimes you're going to be starting your first beat on this string, sometimes over here on all sorts of different fingers. So that's a really good like little grid exercise that you could try. I hope that sort of helps. And then also you could write your own kind of licks around that same kind of idea. So I hope that kind of helps. What we really want to do is kind of decouple the right hand from always attacking on the beat and always being kind of the first kind of part that we think about any sort of move on the guitar. It doesn't necessarily have to start with this. And then we get more comfortable with the idea of this kind of controlling just string changes. So that when you change strings, if it's not in 3-note, as in like triplet or sextuplet feel, you're not thrown off because you're used to this being able to kind of be on any part of the beat. Then maybe the pick isn't involved at all. Then we start to involve a metronome, and the metronome doesn't have to be super busy. In fact, the less kind of beats coming out of your metronome, the more responsible you are for the time. So that's a good thing. And then we want to try sort of mixing up subdivisions. So I really only bother practicing either 4s or 6s, or, you know, 2s or 3s, as in sort of even feel or triplet feel. And loads of other stuff comes out in my playing. That's kind of the nature of my legato, is that it's a little bit chaotic sometimes. But I don't practice things like 5s or 7s. I practice 4s or triplets, basically. So practice kind of snippets that mix those things up, and that can be really good. thing to practice. I hope that kind of helps. Those are some habits that are worth breaking if you want better legato, I think. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and I'll chuck a tab and backing track up on Patreon. Cheers.